Hey friends, Pastor Rich Phipps here. Thanks for joining us for an online sermon at Grace Collective. Now, we hope this proves super helpful for you as you explore or deepen your faith in Jesus. Now, if you live in the Irwin, Pennsylvania area, we would love to meet you in person here at Grace Collective. But if not, keep tuning in, but we hope you'll find a family of Jesus followers where you live who will love you and do life with you. Now, if you have any questions, you can always connect with us by visiting our website, www.gracecollectivechurch.com, or texting the word family to the number 724-530-3730. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get into God's Word.
Hey, so up north in Venango County, there's like a slice of heaven on earth. And it is so beautiful. One of the things that makes it so beautiful up there is this crystal clear stream that flows through the area called Kennardle. And this stream is one of those streams that's just made for wading in and fishing and skipping stones across. And every summer, like once or twice every summer, my mom and dad would take my sister, my brother, and me to spend a day on the stream at Kennardle. And we got there one day, and they took us to a spot in the creek called the swimming hole. It was just the deepest part of the stream. It's like where locals used as a public pool. But we got there one day, nobody else was there, and I walked down to the stream, and immediately, like right across the stream, I saw these huge boulders that were just like made to climb up and jump off. And so I'm like, see ya, and I'm across the stream, and I climbed up those boulders, and I looked down, and I could see like everything under the water. I could see fish swimming. I could see these huge, massive like boulder rocks like way down on the bottom. I could see parts of the boulders I was on jutting out just beneath me. I mean, it was like looking at Bass Pro Shops trout stream, but for real. Like it was right there for real, and it was beautiful. And then I noticed my brother. Like I was 9, so he was like 5, and my brother was swimming across the swimming hole. And right when he got like right in the deepest part, like halfway across, he starts to tire out, and I could tell he's tired. And I thought, oh my gosh, he's going to go down. And my parents, like they're over, like setting up a picnic. My sister, she's downstream throwing rocks. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's up to me. I'm going to jump from here now and rescue my little brother. And it's at that very moment I realized I couldn't make the jump. Like I literally froze on the spot. I looked back down at the water, and instead of being beautiful, it was terrifying. Those parts of the rock I stood on that jutted out, all of a sudden I'm like, I don't know if I can clear those. And those big boulders under the water, I don't know if I can miss those. Hit one of those, I'm going to break my leg. And the sheer height of it, I mean, in my little like 9-year-old brain, it was like only 8 or 10 feet, but it felt like 50 feet to me. And I couldn't make the jump. Now, thankfully, we were all really strong swimmers. So my brother, he was able to U-turn it, get back over to where he could touch. And by the time I scrambled back down and got across the creek, my mom and dad were with him, and he was fine. But I wasn't. I remember it to this day. I couldn't make the jump. And I learned something very valuable that day. If you're going to climb the rocks, make sure you can make the jump. Now, some of you are at a point in your life where you're like, I've got this really, really big decision, this big, scary, high jump to make, and I'm not sure. Like, you're like, do I really want to move across the state or across the country to go to school there next year? Do I really want to remain faithful only to her at the expense of all others? Do I really want to, risk everything, losing this job, quitting this job to pursue that one? Or is this really the right time for us to start a family? And you're looking at a pretty high jump, and you're not sure you can make the leap. How many of y'all, when you come to big decisions like that, how many of y'all like do a pros and cons list? You do that? I do that. I think it's really, really helpful, pros and cons. But at the end of the list, at the end of the day, there's one question you always come down to. Is it worth it? And friends, following Jesus is the same way. You have to ask, is it worth it? You have to ask, is the cost worth the benefit? Jesus demands you count the cost before you follow him. Because following Jesus, is hard. It's hard. Following Jesus, it's going to cost you a lot. It's not easy to be part of his kingdom. It's more than, do I get up and go to church in the morning? Once, maybe twice a month. It's more than, do I believe the right things? Following Jesus is hard, and you have to ask, is it worth it? Jesus asks this. Here's his favorite invitation. When you read through the scriptures, here's his favorite invitation. He's like, follow me. Don't fanboy me or fangirl me, but follow me. Jesus doesn't need fans. People sitting in chairs clapping for him. He doesn't need fans. He needs followers. And those two are radically different. Jesus makes he tells you following him is hard. Every time he looked at people like, hey, Peter, follow me, but it's going to cost you. Hey, Matthew, follow me, but it's going to cost you. Hey, Mary, follow me, but it's going to cost you. Following Jesus is hard. Following Jesus comes with consequences. Your family, they might not like you anymore. Your friends might unfollow you. Your boss, he's going to be confused and not understand you. In some ways, in a lot of ways, your life will get harder, not easier when you follow Jesus. You need to hear that. I'm not trying to talk you out of following Jesus. In fact, just the opposite. I want to make sure if you're going to sign up, if you're going to climb the rocks, that you know how high the jump is. I want to make sure you're authentically going to follow Jesus because that's what Jesus commands. American church has made Christianity so soft and so easy. What? You're a Christian if you go out and ask the world, people who are not followers of Jesus, what's a Christian? You know what they're going to say? One thing they're going to say? Oh, they go to church once or twice. I don't think Jesus is like, woo, way to go to church. Fantastic. I mean, it's important, but if this is the highlight of your faith, we need to talk about how high your jump is. Following Jesus is hard. And we just want you to know that there's a lot to be expected. Jesus expects a lot from you before you even start climbing. So today, I want to unsettle your faith. I want to unsettle your faith. If you're a follower of Jesus, I'm going to push you out of your comfort zone because, again, American churches have made being a Christian so easy. Here's a question I've been wrestling with. We'll come back to it in a few minutes. But here's the question. If Jesus was the pastor of this church, would you and I still be here? It's a big question. Would you and I, we'll come back to that in just a moment. But would we check him out online or come once or twice and then say, oh man, it's a lot harder than I thought. From across the creek, it looked easy. But when I got here, it's way harder. When you read through the Gospels, it almost feels like Jesus is trying to push people away, but he wasn't. He just wants to make sure you know this is not a cakewalk. Here's what Jesus did. So huge crowds would gather around Jesus, right? He's rock star status. Wherever Jesus went, crowds gathered. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands. He had lots of crowds around him. And as pastors, we like that. I don't know a single pastor who hopes they have 5 people and that's all. We like a big crowd, and I cannot lie. Thank you. Some of you got that. We like a full room. In fact, we want a bigger room with more chairs and more people. Come on, we'll crowd more in. We would love that. Jesus had those big crowds around him. And when we get the crowds, we love to tell you how much we love you, right? Pastor Jonathan did that already. Hey, we have a free gift for you if you're new. That's why we have people out at the street holding signs. That's why we have people in the parking lot loving on you the moment you get out of your car. And here, come on in this direction. How's your day today? We have a killer, that sounds bad, hospitality team. They are just killing it out there. We have a great hospitality team who love on you when you walk in. Then you come around the corner, and there's like a Starbucks ready cafe that's all for free. Welcome to $0. It's all for free. And we do all of that so that you feel like we want you here. And that we expect you to be here. Like we've been expecting you. And we're ready for you. And we're so thankful. And we tell you we're so thankful you're here. And Jesus gets all these big crowds around him, but he doesn't start that way. You know what Jesus did? He turned people away sometimes. Jesus had these big crowds, and he was more like, why are you here? I know you came a long way, but why? Why did you come here? Because what you're about to hear from me is going to be so hard, you might want to just go home now. Jesus did not make following him easy because he knows it's not. Jesus is like, hey, why did you come? I don't need you to be a halfway follower. I don't need you to be my fan. If you're going to follow me, then you got to be all in. Jesus needs people who are all in. I'm in all the way. Let's go save the world followers. Because you know what happens with halfway followers? They tend to group up together and they stay inside and they do things that's comfortable for them inside the four walls of their church. Jesus does not need halfway followers. Jesus needs people who are ready to get out of the chairs and go save the world. So let's go back to this question, the question I've been wrestling with all week. If Jesus was planting this church or pastoring this church, would you be part of it? And I think immediately, like your surface answer is, yeah. That would be so awesome, right? Hey, by the way, Jesus is preaching. If you signed up to be on our database, you got the message, right? Jesus is preaching Sunday. I would camp out Saturday night to get a seat for Sunday morning. Would you want to be a part of that church? Okay, 5 of you. Okay, I thought it'd be a little more, right? You want to be part of that church? Yes. Until Jesus opened his mouth. Because here's what would happen. So Jonathan comes up and, hey, we're so glad you're here. We love you, da-da-da. Hey, and here's Jesus. And Jesus comes up and Jesus says some stuff that, man, it's going to be hard to hear. Jesus starts with, hey, love your enemies. What? Love my enemies? Why would I do that? They're my enemy, Jesus. I hate my enemies. It's more fun that way. We just know we hate each other. I just try to avoid them at all costs. It's way easier. And Jesus would say, okay, fine. And go home. You can't be my follower. Or Jesus would come up and he'd open his mouth and he would say, I want you to go home today and get on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist or everywhere you go, and I want you to sell all that you have, give the money to the poor, and then come back and follow me. Jesus, you're funny. Wait, you're not laughing, Jesus? Wasn't that like a parable or something? Wasn't that supposed to be like a metaphor? No, I want you to go home. I want you to sell all that you have, give it to the poor, and then come back and follow me. But Jesus, you want me to sell my car and my house and my 70-inch, 4K TV? You want me to sell? I'll give it to the poor. Yeah, if you can't part with that to take care of other people, then just go home. You can't follow me. Jesus didn't make following him easy. Jesus knows that following him is hard. Jesus knows, you've got to be all in. Look, what if Jesus did this? What if he was preaching and he's like, hey, I am glad you're here, but everybody get up. We're going to go do something different today because you need different. So everybody get up and let's go. Let's follow me. Come on, follow me. And he'd be like, what? Why are you still sitting here? Follow me. Let's go. And you're like, well, I just got here. I was barely made it here with my life, with my kids. I couldn't even get out of the house, right, without losing my faith. I just got settled in and comfortable. I just got my coffee. And Jesus like, oh, boo-hoo. Are you going to follow me or not? Because the world is lost out there. Either follow me or don't. But following me looks like this. You follow me. You go where I go. You do what I do. You obey my commands. And we save the world. That's our job. Jesus needs followers, not fans. Because the job that he has given us to do is so important and so immense. You can't have people not jumping because they get scared. Jesus said, follow me. He makes it hard because he knows it's hard. It's not that he doesn't love on any people. He just doesn't want to lead them astray. He doesn't want you to think this is a cakewalk. Following Jesus is hard. So we're going to dig into that a little bit. This is like the second part of our message series we call Kingdom. So far, we have talked about the fact that there's a king, right? King Jesus. And he's a different kind of king than any other king. We've talked about the fact that there is a kingdom. And last week we talked about different truths about that kingdom. But for the whole month of February, we're going deeper in. And we're going to talk about life in the kingdom. What does God expect? What does God require of people who say, I'm a follower of Jesus? Now, just so that you know that I'm not making this up, let me show you from God's word how high Jesus' standards are. Now, what I'm about to read to you comes from a man named Luke. Luke was not one of Jesus' 12 apostles. Some people think he was. He was not. He was not an apostle, but he knew them. Luke was a physician turned investigative journalist. And he put his skills to use going around and discovering and fact-checking the claims of Jesus. So he interviewed like the apostles, Jesus' family, Jesus' friends, people who experienced Jesus' miracles or healing or listened to his teachings. So he went around, he spent all this time beautifully interviewing and gathering from people all these facts about Jesus. Then he put them all together, wrote them down, and we call it the Gospel according to Luke, right? And so let me read to you about one day in Jesus' life that Luke writes about. Here's what he says. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said, "Get this break." Again, not unusual. Large crowds were always around Jesus. In fact, Jesus had trouble getting away from the crowds. Not this day, but another day. There was a time Jesus just needed to be with the 12 apostles. And so he and they got into a boat along the Sea of Galilee, and they started to row the 8 miles it would take to get across to the other side, and left all the crowd on the seashore. They're like, oh, well, we see where he's going. And so they walked 15 miles halfway around the lake. And when Jesus landed, there were literally 10,000 people waiting for him. Crowds were always around Jesus. This day was just like that. They're always on the heels of Jesus. It's one of those times. And again, big crowd. I know how I would start that message. Listen to how Jesus addressed them. See if this makes you feel like warm and fuzzy, okay? He said to them, if anyone comes to me, kind of like y'all have, you come from all over, good. If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. Doesn't that sound good? Like, wow. Can you imagine people in the crowd? Like, wait, what? I walked 2.5 days to hear this guy. Now I don't even think I want to be around him. So let's break this down. Does Jesus really want you to hate your family? Simple answer, no, of course not, right? You cannot divorce, take one piece of Scripture out of the rest of the context of Scripture. And we know from Scripture, God is the author of family, the creator of family. God tells us we're supposed to love our wives, and wives love your husbands, and love your kids, and kids obey and respect, and love your parents, right? He knows the family is important, so important. In fact, so important that when Jesus came into the world, he came through a family, right? So no, he doesn't want you to hate your family. So what is Jesus saying when he says, hate your family? Well, the word there in Greek, do you know what it actually means? It means hate. I got nothing for you. It's hate. But it's used in a way that it is meant to be a comparison. So what Jesus is actually saying is, hey, you've got to love them less than you love me. Okay, here's where this gets real. Some of you may know this from your own family experience. There may be a time when your family will get in the way between you and Jesus. And Jesus is saying, hey, if that happens, when that happens, you can choose them or you can choose me. But you got to love me more. If you're going to choose them, just go home now. You cannot follow me. You must love me and follow me more than you love your family. This is not easy. Following Jesus is hard. In fact, say that with me. Following Jesus is hard. But Jesus wasn't done. The very next breath, this is what Jesus said to that same crowd. He said, and whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Now, you have to remember, I think this is so cool. This is important. Remember when that was spoken. Jesus said that before he went to the cross to be crucified, right? Like, we say that a lot. Like, oh, you got to carry your cross. Yeah, I got to suffer a little bit like Jesus when he carried his cross. I got to suffer a little bit like Jesus suffered. They didn't have that frame of reference. Jesus had not gone to the cross yet. Their only frame of reference is what they knew from their culture and what they understood. They would not have missed this. They understood crucifixion The Roman style of execution was the most horrible, painful death imaginable. They're not thinking about Jesus. They're just thinking about, hey, 2 days ago, I walked the main street in this one town, and there were 75 people crucified along the sides of the road. The Romans would line the roads with people they crucified. These people were used to the ugly, smelly reality, painful part of death from crucifixion. And so when Jesus said, if you're not willing to carry your cross, he wasn't talking about how we talk about it. He was saying, if you're not willing to die for me, then don't join me. If you're not willing to give everything for me, then just go home now. It's a high jump. Following Jesus is hard. Say it again with me. Following Jesus is hard. Now, Jesus isn't saying he doesn't want you to follow him. He just wants you to know how hard it is, how high the jump is. And at this point, don't you think people are getting nervous in the crowd? Like, y'all okay? I'm looking at y'all. Some of you are like a little bit nervous. You okay? Okay, take a breath. It's going to be all right. We'll get through this. You have a lot to talk about in life groups this week. Whew. Yeah, it's going to be a fun week in life groups. But people are probably getting nervous in the crowd. This is more than they bargained for, right? They probably started shuffling their feet, looking around. Is everybody else feeling what I'm feeling? Because I'm a little uneasy right now about this. I thought this dude was all about love and grace and forgiveness. But he's telling me I got to die for him. I didn't come to hear that. So they're kind of reeling. So Jesus kind of reels them in. In the next breath, he says this. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. They're like, oh, yeah, I know. I know about building stuff. Build a house, build a garage, build a barn, build a tower. Yeah, I know how to build stuff. So suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? They're like, yeah, that's exactly what I would do. For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, this person began to build and wasn't able to finish it. And maybe someone in the crowd actually nudges her friend beside her and says, remember that goofy guy beside you at home, your neighbor? What was his name? Daniel. And he started to build that barn, but he only built half of it because he ran out of money. He should listen to this guy, right? So Jesus is trying to kind of collect them back in. Then he says this. He says, or suppose a king is about to go to war against another king. Like, yeah, they understood that. That's the world they lived in. Won't he first sit down and consider whether he is able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he's not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off and will ask for terms of peace. Which terms of peace means, how do I go out there with just a couple people and say, we surrender, what do I need to do to appease you, right? So he says, you go out there and you ask for terms of peace. He said, in the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples. That's hard. It feels harsh. Jesus wasn't trying to drive anybody away. He just wanted to make sure they understood. So he addressed the crowds like, you know what it's like to build a building? You make sure you got enough money to cover the cost. And you know, if you're going to go out to war and you can't beat the people coming against you, what do? Bake a pie, take it out to them, say, hey, try this and don't beat us up. And what do we need to do to surrender to you? Jesus said, you know, this is how you live your lives. And all of this, he's talking about all of this now in the context of following him. He says, you know how you do this in real life. Hey, the same is true when you follow me. And you have to ask, am I worth it? Am I worth it to you to lose everything so you can follow me? So that's what Jesus said. But, that's 2,000 years ago, right? What in the world does that have to do with you and me today? Well, everything. Because the call hasn't changed. The world is still lost. Following Jesus is still hard, no matter what the American church says. It is still hard. It's still a high jump. And Jesus still needs followers, not fans. And so Jesus still wants to know today if you and I are willing to give everything to follow him. So how are you doing it that, by the way? How bad do you feel about yourself? Not like, I'm so glad I came today, Rich, right? Anybody here for the first time? I'm so sorry. We had someone at the early service like, oh man, dude, I'm sorry. But I'm not, right? It's like Reese, sorry, not sorry. Because we need to know this. So here's a good exercise to see how you're doing. I did this past week. Maybe you won't do it today or this week. I took 4 people from the Bible that I knew, they were followers of Jesus. They gave everything to follow Jesus. I thought, well, I'll take those 4 people and I'll just put myself beside them and I'll just compare. I know God's not in the comparison game, but when it comes to what he expects from us about giving everything, we all have the same standard. We all wear the same shoe size right there. And so I picked 4 people. I started with Matthew, the tax collector. And I thought, okay, Matthew, tax collector, super rich, has every luxury the world can afford because of his job. People don't like him. But besides that, maybe he didn't care. He was rolling in money, right? So had all the money in the world, everything he wanted, until one day Jesus walked by his tax collector's booth and said, Matthew, come follow me. And he leapt over the booth, left all of that behind, to go and have nothing and follow Jesus. That's Matthew. And I thought, what about Peter? Peter was one day by the Sea of Galilee. He was mending his nets, washing his fishing nets. He had his boat pulled up there. He was a business owner. He owned a fishing business, right? He had his own boat or boats. He had a crew. He had his own nets. And Jesus walked by and said, hey, Peter, follow me. And Peter dropped his nets, waved at his crew, left his boats. Peter left his family. Now, did he leave them permanently? No, because Jesus wouldn't ask him to do that. They centered their ministry a lot around Galilee, so he got to see his family, but it certainly changed their lifestyle and their patterns. Peter dropped everything to follow Jesus. Then looked at Saul, who later became Paul. Saul was the rising star of the Jewish faith, religiously, politically. He's the next big thing in Jewish culture until he decided to follow Jesus. And he lost it all. He lost his power, his prestige, his position, his possessions, his paycheck, his pride. He lost everything. Paul gave away everything to gain the one thing that was better than everything. He lost it all to follow Jesus. And then the last person I looked at was a guy named Stephen. Maybe you've heard of him. He was we call him the first Christian martyr. Right after the church was very, very brand new, just starting, he was stoned to death because of his faith in Jesus. And even while they're pummeling him with stones and he's dying, he is witnessing to them, the people throwing at him, about Jesus. He literally gave his life following Jesus. I took these 4 guys, I set them up, and I thought, okay, here I come. You know what I did when I put myself next to those 4 guys? I wanted to sing the Sesame Street song, 4 of these things look like the other, which one doesn't belong? Well, that was easy. Me. Because what have I sacrificed? I grew up in good old American church. What have I sacrificed? Sunday mornings? What have I honestly sacrificed to follow Jesus compared to these guys? Friends, Jesus has not changed the demands of following him. Jesus wants to know, he wants to know where you stand with him. Because following him is hard. You might lose your family. You might lose your friends. Your girlfriend might break up with you. Your boss may actually fire you. Your teammates may exclude you. God may call you to pick up your wife, pick up your kids, sell your house, and move to the remotest parts of Alaska and start a Christian camp because people need Jesus there. Does that sound far-fetched? Go ask the wildlife fishery biologist from Georgia who he and his wife did that with their 6 or 7 kids, little kids, are living up there right now. This is real. This is what following Jesus looks like. And Jesus just wants to know, are you in? If you're not, then stay off the rocks. If you can't make the jump, don't do the climb. When Marcia and I were pastoring, leading a church over in West Mifflin, we had this really, really cool family that started coming to our church. They're from Singapore. And their names were Kakui and his wife Ruth. And they had 2 beautiful little girls, Grace and Faith. And one night, we just loved to hang out with them. He was here. They were here for a year because he was working, finishing his PhD at CMU. Super smart. They're from Singapore. They're all super smart. And we're just one night having dinner with them. And we're just, cherishing the fact that they were part of our church and we just loved them. And that's the night they told us their stories. So I don't know if you know this, but Singapore is not a Christian nation. About a third of the people in Singapore are Buddhist. They live, the Far East, that worldview influence. So Buddhism is the primary religion of their country. The next 20% of people are nothing at all. They just believe nothing. They don't practice any faith. So over 50% right there are not Christian. In fact, the number of Christians in the country of Singapore are about 17 to 18% is all. So Kok Kwee and Ruth did not grow up in Christian families. But then someone risked everything to tell them the good news about Jesus. And it changed their lives. And they became followers of Jesus. And now they had to go tell their non-Christian families about their decision. When I decided to go into ministry to become a pastor, I dreaded telling my family that. Like my mom and my dad. I knew my mom, she'd be like, it's about time, woo! But my dad, I knew would be very, very different. He would be angry and frustrated because I was no longer going to be a dentist and make money. That was my dad's point of view. But the nervousness I felt talking to my dad was nothing compared to Kok Kwee talking to his dad. The moment Kok Kwee said, I am now a follower of Jesus, his dad was like, you're done. You've brought shame and disgrace on me and my family. You are no longer my son. Get out of our family. And Ruth was the same. And in that culture, that's something. At that point, they could have decided, wait, I didn't realize it was this high. Let's climb back down. And let's just go back to what we were doing. But they didn't. They made the jump. And they were excommunicated from their families. They had to love Jesus more than their mom and their dad and their brothers or sisters. They loved Jesus. And here's the good news. Because they loved Jesus so authentically, they actually were able to still love their families in spite of their families hating them. And they actually won some of their families to Jesus. In fact, if my memory serves me correctly, I believe Kok Kwee won his dad to Christ on his dad's deathbed. How super cool is that? But they made the jump. They weren't fans. They were followers. That's what following Jesus looks like. And Jesus just wants to know, hey, are you in? Like maybe some of you have that family, like I don't know, and my family doesn't want me to follow Jesus. Maybe that's where you are, but most of us will never face that level of persecution from our families. But for you, it's going to be something different, right? What if what you have to say no to is maybe it's your career or your home or your lifestyle choices or your bank account? Jesus wants to know if you think he's worth it. Jesus doesn't want you to run off, but he needs to know where you stand. Is he worth it to you? And maybe this morning, friends, that is something you need to wrestle with. Because here's Jesus' invitation. Follow me. Follow me. And following Jesus is hard. Now listen, if you're here today and you're just starting out in faith, just know that God loves you and he wants you to follow him. In fact, next week, we're going to talk about really why he is worth it and how do I do this? If it's so hard, such a high jump, how do I actually do this? We're going to get into that next week, so don't miss next week. But maybe this week, you just need to come before God and say, God, I want to make the jump. Help me to have the courage to do it. I want to follow you.